Delivering Engaging Accessibility Training at Scale with Greg Alchin and Sarah Police. AliCamp 2022. AliCamp would like to thank our gold sponsors Intopia, Salesforce and Telstra, and silver sponsors ANZ, Deloitte Digital and Coles.
Hey everyone, welcome to Greg's and my presentation on delivering engaging accessibility training at scale. My name is Sarah Police. I'm one of the directors at Intopia. And Greg.
Hi everyone, my name is Greg Alchin and I'm the Principal Accessibility Specialist at Service New South Wales. I'm really excited to be presenting this to you with the wonderful Sarah.
Let's have some fun. So Greg, over to you about accessibility at Service New South Wales.
Oh, look, I could talk about this for ages, Sarah. I really could. Can you just flick to the next screen for me? Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Look, Service New South Wales, it has this great vision. We want to provide a world-class experience for everyone. Now, 80% of New South Wales services can be done online and through the app at this point in time. We've got over 60 product teams and over 400 staff. So we're a really huge organisation. Everybody's keen to know more about how they can design inclusively and make it accessible for all. The issue is, how do we do it? So how do we go from that intention to something bigger? And for us, inclusion's a journey. We at the moment have a 2-hour onboarding on inclusive design and accessibility, a 1-hour piece on inclusive design for everybody. And then we run a special 1-hour piece on accessibility that is specific to each of those practice areas of our product managers and our designers and our engineers. We also have a dedicated support space via our intranet, which is hosted on Confluence, and also on our Slack channel. They're our main things. We also bring in speakers, but we realized we needed more than that. And that's why we reached out to Sarah.
And so the rest of the presentation today, we're actually going to talk about the training program that Greg, myself, and many others have been working on the past year. We're going to talk about, first of all, what we did in discovery. Then we're going to talk about the different courses that we had and also some of the delivery mechanisms that we used, because we had both synchronous and asynchronous learning as part of this program. We're going to talk about some pre and post check assessments that we had. And then, finally, sort of what did we learn of this? What was the feedback and what are those next steps moving forward? So let's first of all talk about our discovery and pilot. So we did a fairly extensive discovery session where we actually did both individual and group interviews. We talked to a range of people in Service New South Wales. That included practice and portfolio leads, product managers, product designers, and engineers and testers. And what we were really looking at is kind of what the current state of accessibility and accessibility training was at Service New South Wales. So we could use this to inform the training program and make it as tailored as possible and meet all those things that we wanted to do. So a few insights that we got from the discovery session. First of all, under capability and practice, we realized that there was no common understanding of what accessibility meant. So we had a few questions that sort of prompted, around this. And what we discovered is that no one was sure what an accessible product meant. Did it mean conformance with WCAG? Did it mean working with customers? Everyone had a slightly different view, which meant everyone might have been working towards accessibility, but they weren't all on the same page about what that meant.
Look, there was a few things that happened there, Sarah. I think whilst people had that intention, as you've said, both you and I came on board around about the same time. My role was new, but what we both found in our own discovery and in your discovery there, it was this inconsistency. And because of that inconsistency, what was happening was that accessibility was one of the first things that got dropped off on product delivery. And we see that happen in so many organizations, and that's because of the lack of understanding of this. And so it was really important for us to get that clear picture, because we needed the clarity, because our staff here aren't all in one place. Our staff are all over New South Wales. And we know that through this, it was hampering our capability. This inconsistency was hampering our ability to consistently deliver a great product on a consistent basis. We needed that information to then work out what the training was going to be.
Absolutely. And another thing that came out, which was quite interesting, was around the GEL, the Global Experience Language, or design system, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. And look, everybody's got a GEL in some form or another if they're in a larger organisation. You look at the BBC, the ABC, a whole range of things. But here's the issue. I talk about the GEL. Everyone's going, oh, if we just use the GEL, everything's going to be okay. And I went, guys, it doesn't mean that you put your brain into neutral. You're making some assumptions there. One, you're making an assumption that all the GEL components are 100% accessible, but they're all little micro elements. Here's the thing. If you imagine that each little element was like an ingredient in cooking, put those ingredients in the wrong amount, in the wrong order, and you get something that tastes like dog food. Put it in the right mix, in the right order, and you get an a la carte meal, a great experience for everybody. And that's what we wanted. But we had to break that assumption about the GEL.
That's right. It's kind of, for me, like Lego building blocks. It's like each of the individual blocks might work on their own, but you can still build a wall that's got holes and might fall down.
Very much so.
And another big one was time and resources growth.
Oh, look, yes. Because we've got about 80% of our products that are out there, and you think over this last 12, 18 months, what have we seen? We've had COVID, we've had floods, we've had the vouchers come out. There's been a whole range, bushfires, a whole range of things. So there has been
also a rat infestation at some point too.
Rat infestation, yep. You name it. Biblical plagues, there were other things as well. It was amazing. An incredible time. But in that pressure to deliver results becomes those competing priorities. Now, here's the issue. As I said, because we're working on those poor assumptions about accessibility, things that are misunderstood are the things that get thrown overboard in that rush to get something out. The other thing is too, not having good, consistent processes in there meant that there were additional time pressures put within those existing apps and products, because you can actually save time. And I think that's the big message for everybody in here. Good, accessible processes and inclusive processes save you time in the longer run.
Absolutely. And of course, they create a better experience for everyone.
Huge.
So those were just a few insights we got from Discovery. Let's have a look at then how that translated into the courses that we actually pulled together. So our first course was what we called Accessibility Fundamentals. And really this was for everyone. It could be taken by everyone across Service New South Wales, but in particular in this program, it meant anyone who did any of the other courses we'll be talking about that are role-based all had that consistent foundation.
We needed a consistent base of knowledge, a consistent understanding of the mindsets that are within there, because if you haven't got that, you can't build upon that. And I suppose, Sarah, to take your Lego analogy, I want to make sure the foundation of my Lego wall is really, really strong. So the rest is nice and strong. This is where the strength lies, in this first piece.
Absolutely. And I know, often when I was doing some of the practical sessions, I'd ask people what their takeaways were. And quite a few people came out of the accessibility fundamentals realizing accessibility was so much broader than what they thought. So often, a lot of the time, I guess, people might assume it's more apparent disabilities rather than non-apparent disabilities, or a lovely line that I once read, screen readers are the poster child of accessibility. That one stuck with me for many years.
Yeah.
There's so many people who came back and said, yeah, I've just got this richer understanding of who this applies to.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, is that it gave them a chance to safely challenge their own assumptions and reflect on there. For me, the other thing is that it didn't matter who you were in the organisation, you had a consistent language and framework to use. So we weren't working on different definitions of accessibility. We had this common definition and a common approach. So that shared understanding allowed us to build and grow.
So on to our next courses. So these ones were geared towards our product designers. And we actually had two courses here. We had Designing for Accessibility and Inclusion, which was more looking at the different kind of patterns or things that you do when designing an interface. So, you know, good old contrast fits it within there, but so do so many other things like, you know, having a responsive website or, you know, structuring your page in a way that's easily navigable. But then we went, of course, beyond this into conducting user research with people with disability. And I'm not going to steal your thunder here, Greg. I know you're really passionate about this, so am I.
Look, as our tagline at the start said, you know, it's inclusive by design and accessible by default. For it to be inclusive by design, you've got to start with user research up front, right? Because you've got to work with the customers. Now, for me, disability is a lived experience. And so I go, look, to quote the old CRPD line, nothing about us without us. And so here we know we come up with better products every time we co-design with people. We get that richer understanding, which we saw in those accessibility fundamentals. But unless you do it here first, you go down the assumption path. And the assumption path is paved maybe with good intention, but it leads to hell. The reason it leads to hell is that you come up with this product that you think is great. And when you show it to the customers go, this ain't going to float it. This is not going to do it for me. Then they get upset because they weren't consulted. You get upset because, hey, they don't like all my hard work. And they go, yeah, you didn't listen, you didn't consult. This course was absolutely crucial. The thing that everybody who did this course came away from going, wow, I've got this far richer experience. It also led I think, to part of our accessibility hackathon, which was held within the organisation. But can I say, if you're going to invest anywhere, conducting the user research with people with disabilities is, again, that's your cornerstone Lego block, because you build from there. And it's also getting that MVC, the minimum viable cohort of people who have intersectional disabilities who are going to give you great insights to deliver a far better product experience for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of those, of all the courses, the last module of the Conducting User Research with People with Disability, we actually bring a panel of people with lived experience in. And so the researchers get to, first of all, hear about their experience and then do some what we call mini mock usability sessions. And the changes, I think someone actually called it life-changing. That's the comment that they made after, sort of attending this session. And it's just, you can see the light bulb moment as people, they've done the theory, we've talked about all the fantastic things to set a session up for success when we do user research, but then they actually put that into practice and actually see the value of that user research and that usability testing.
Yeah, but also it gave the participants from Service New South Wales the tools, but then the safety to have those conversations and that framework. And I think that's what made it really, really useful for everybody, was all the rich thinking that you've done into that course.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's because I've asked researchers before why they don't do inclusive research. And usually you have in a group at least one who said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing, or I don't know how to go about this. So you're right, it's as much about the experience for participants, coming with their lived experience, but also for those researchers. I want them to go away and feel empowered to continue this, Hey, I'm still learning. You're not going to learn everything overnight, or through a single course, but it's about actually taking those learnings and that passion to move forward.
That's what it did. Everybody who I've spoken to goes, I feel more confident. Yes, I've still got a way to go, but I feel more confident. And that's the thing. Their level of awareness throughout all of these courses, but this one in particular, has dramatically increased. Their capability has increased, but in that they've also realized what they don't know. And that in itself is a great thing, because it takes us all on the next journey, which we'll talk about later on.
Absolutely. So we had one course here. We did focus on web in the first instance, although we know that native mobile app is a whole nother area as well. And this course was called Developing for Web Accessibility. Of course, quite a different course to the design-related courses. Here we're getting right into the code and really looking at those different coding techniques that we want those engineers to be using to create a more accessible product.
Some people have this misconception that if you get the design right, everything else will be right. You go, no, it's the combination. Everybody has a role to play, and that's why we had those courses for the PMs, for the designers, and for these engineers, because the engineers are absolutely crucial. Good code includes, bad code excludes, and it's the same here. So getting people aware of that, but also it gave people a chance, because if you have a look at a lot of coders, and more so than some of the designers, it's kind of like how you might have been taught to drive by either self-taught or you've been taught by a crazy uncle. And so you might have picked up a few bad habits along the way. And this is the thing that people who did this course, they went, oh, so little changes in my processes and my behaviors return big benefits. Looking at how I'm using ARIA, how I've got things properly labeled, understanding how it all connects together between the CSS and the HTML and the ARIA and the JavaScript, and realizing that you can have one part accessible but not another.
And we've got that testing course. And I remember this was a really interesting one during Discovery, where we found out, first of all, Service New South Wales doesn't have a lot of QAs. So there's not a lot of dedicated people working on testing generally, let alone testing for accessibility. And so what we found is that there are actually lots of different roles in the teams, or people in the teams actually doing the testing. So, it might be sort of more technical engineers, it might actually be the more non-technical, and that included both the product designers and also the product managers.
It comes back to a clarity of role, because even while we don't have dedicated testers in all our teams, as you said, if we go back to the analogy of a Word document, you wouldn't send out a Word document that hasn't been spell checked or grammar checked. Nowadays, we wouldn't send it out without being accessibility checked either. But it's the same here. What are getting people to realize they all have a responsibility to play in that testing process, but also for the product manager to go, I've got to ensure that my team has actually done this. And that's one of the greatest changes I think we've seen in the organisation, is the awareness with our product managers of that responsibility to oversee that product quality, and to see it not as something separate, but as part of a normal quality process. And it's also led to a greater discussion about what the tools, but the really, I think, important thing is, as we know, any good testing process relies on a whole range of tools. Like yes, you're going to use some automated tools. Yes, you're going to use some manual processes. You're going to do some manual checks. I think what's come out from everybody is they're going, oh, I thought it all had to be with a screen reader. I think it's kind of like those poster child conversations, Sarah. You go, no, look, you got to test it in a range of ways. But as I've said to people, we don't ship a car that's not built to safety standards. We shouldn't be shipping product that's not designed to accessibility standards. And I think the good thing about the course is giving people a better understanding of what that involves, and simple processes and mechanisms to undertake that. And I think that's the thing that anybody can take on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that word simple, Greg, with the testing course in particular, we actually chose to look for tests that were what I call biggest bang for buck. So testing against all of WCAG, I've done it in the past. It takes a long time.
How long's that piece of string?
Yeah, that's right. And so that discovery, when we, looked at not just who was doing the testing, but also all those time constraints and that, we're like, well, look, this is kind of a two-prong approach. We want to integrate accessibility throughout the process. So user research, including then those user needs in the design and engineering. Hopefully then we've actually got the product close to right, as right as you can get when we talk accessibility. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But then the testing, we sort of went, this is our little gate, but we can't test everything. So what are we going to focus on here that is going to either be areas that we know, our issues arise, or, are going to have most impact on a user if there is an issue there, rather than trying to do everything around WCAG.
I think the other thing that happens in there, that very practical approach to accessibility, everyone goes, the collective sigh of relief from people, because then they go, yes, I want to strive to have for the best possible experience for everybody from the start. And as you said, that rich thing, but what's practical, but also given that we are under incredible time constraints, given the nature of the services that we're delivering and experiences, it also fitted with that. So it's what I would call agile testing for us.
Yep. Yeah. And that actually brings us to the last course, which is for the product managers, that managing accessibility in digital products, which sort of brings all of this together, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
And I think that's where, we talked about things like, first of all, how does a good sort of project run? How do we integrate accessibility into all those different parts of a product development life cycle? And, good old shift left and making sure we're addressing accessibility as early on as possible through, research insights, design, engineering, testing, and the iteration that goes with that. But then it was also around, how do we actually include accessibility as part of that process? So definitions of done, acceptance criteria, as we said, you don't always get it right. And with time pressures, you sometimes do need to launch, with things that might not be, quite as perfect as we want. But how do we make those decisions? And that's really what we saw in that managing course, is product managers, really thinking about that and reflecting on what they're currently doing, but then reflecting on how they can integrate accessibility more so it becomes business as usual.
It's given them permission to think that way. And given we also, as a large organisation that's continually growing, and we know there's competition for staff, it's important that people collectively have that understanding. And I think that's great, because we're starting to see it in richer conversations at a more strategic level above the teams. But it's also going, yeah, okay, I can manage this. And this is the thing, it's everyone going, if you look at that whole journey from the fundamentals through to the PMs here, that consistency of understanding, the shift left, but also going, it's what's practical. It's right. Not big. I don't have to run from this, and hide under my blankie. It's something we can bake in, and so we can take our organisational vision, people's personal intent, because that's one of the things I love about this organisation. Everybody goes, how do we make it better for the customers? What I'm seeing is that our courses help to remove the barriers to creating a barrier-free experience for everybody. And it's because it's given them that understanding, and particularly the PMs, because they're the ones who are driving that within their individual teams.
And I think what this shows is that a training program, although I could give you outlines and syllabi and things like that, it's as much a cultural change as anything. Yeah. It's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And I think that's what's really shone through in this program.
Yeah. the strategic opportunities to hold those conversations elsewhere to drive the cultural change.
Let's have a look at the format that we actually
Yep.
use. So I mentioned, we did both synchronous and asynchronous learning here. So what we actually did, we used a combination of short videos, which were self-paced, so people could actually watch those in their own time. Along with that, there were some self-paced activities as well. So for each video, or most videos, you got a self-paced activity, just a little activity that you could do that was hands-on. And then we actually had live practical sessions that went with each module, where a module was consisted of those videos and those self-paced exercises.
We've got staff not only all over New South Wales, but we've got staff, in parts of Australia and overseas. And so the beauty of that mode, but also because of we were delivering this during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we were.
And so it allowed us to come up with a model that could not only dealt with the challenges of COVID at that time, but also works with our distributed work environment. And well, let's be honest, that's going to be the way we're going for some time.
That's right, and it's not just COVID, as you said, because so many organisations, Service New South Wales included, are distributed. It's about how do we get those learnings and how do we still build that culture? And I think that's where this mix of both self-paced and still the live practical activities that we'll have a bit of a look at in a sec, really, really worked well.
Very much so.
So kind of the way we did this was, let's say each course was a slightly different length. They went from about, if we take out the accessibility fundamentals, which was always week 1, they went from about anywhere between 2 and 5 weeks in length. So if we had a course that was, say, 4 weeks in length, in week 1, we would release those module 1 videos and those self-paced activities. And then the following week, we would have the practical session related to module 1. And that was an hour session where we had a live facilitator online and went through some activities. In that same week, though, we also released the module 2 videos. And then the following week, we had the module 2 practicals and so on and so forth. So really, it sort of went on a 2-weekly cycle. And that meant that people had that time to watch the videos within the week, but then do that follow-up practical session as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, Sarah, was that 2-week cycle, because yes, we wanted people to invest in professional development, but we also know that there were competing demands on their times. It also gave people a little bit more flexibility, which I think helped the learning process for everybody.
Absolutely. And we've actually got a quote from someone that says that. This quote says, "I like the mix of videos and live practical sessions very much. The videos are informative and super useful. The live practical sessions are essential to deepening the understanding we gain from the videos." And really, that's almost the picture perfect quote, because that's what we wanted out of those two sort of different modalities.
It is.
Yeah. So let's have a look at the videos, because there were some things we actually did quite a bit of thinking before we started recording about the videos, how to present the information. We actually had a chat internally to Intopia with some of our team members to get their insights about what worked for them in terms of videos. And I think it came out quite well.
Oh, look, it certainly did.
Yep. So the first one was, clean design, kind of, a given when it comes to good delivery, good accessibility, but we really tried to not overload, information on the screen. We sort of stuck to, headings and text, or headings and images. So that just helped people to concentrate and not have too much visual information coming through in addition to the audio. On screen, I do have a screenshot. I tried to find a nice screenshot of me. This was about the best I could do. Finding a screenshot when you've got a talking head on the screen on the right-hand side and you've not got your mouth open or some other funny expression is actually really hard. So we sort of had that text on the left-hand side, and then the talking head, which in this case was me, on the right-hand side. We then, had those supporting visuals to go with whatever message we were conveying. So that could include just some short text on the screen, or it could include some visuals, images and that kind of thing. The really interesting thing I remember, and it was actually the very first session that I ran, and unsolicited feedback came about the videos in the first live practical session. And I didn't ask, I wasn't, expecting it. But I remember one person who was neurodiverse saying that they would normally turn on captions to help with sort of that understandability of the video. But the way we'd actually portrayed the information, having some of those short text sentences on the screen that actually supported what we were saying, they actually said they didn't need to turn on the captions in this case. So I thought that was a great win, actually, from a video perspective.
What it also talked about is distilling those key points. That clarity of the communication meant that it was more inclusive of a whole range of different learning needs.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, we had captions as well for those that needed it. Now, I mentioned before the talking head that we had, and we pretty much had this nearly on every single video. There might have been the odd time when we needed the full sort of video real estate, and we might phase out the head for 30 seconds or so. But outside of that, we always had a person on screen. This sort of helped. First of all, it did have something on screen moving at all points in time. So we talked to some people who were neurodiverse, who, for instance, had ADHD. And one of the things that they said is by having a talking head, it actually helped with that understandability and that comprehension, to have something that was moving and sort of narrating essentially those videos. The other thing we did was not actually put the talking head in a box. So it's actually me as a cutout. So we used a green screen. And so I'm actually integrated as part of the video itself. And that actually also meant that it didn't sort of segment or separate out the talking head from the text as well. And that just helped again with that sort of readability and understandability of information. And some feedback from one of our attendees from Service New South Wales. I appreciated the webinar format. I liked that there was an instructor in the video. It helped me concentrate.
Yeah, and I think what it does is it humanized the whole process as well. And I think giving people a chance in humanizing it allowed them to build a connection with the presenters, but then build a connection with the content as part of that process.
And another thing we did was have short transitions. So we usually only wanted the same content on screen for about maximum of 30 seconds. So once again, more visual information, smaller chunks of information, really moving that along to keep people's attention, because we know that video content can be a bit tricky for some people. And we had that feedback. We had actually some people who were like, actually, the videos, the way they were produced worked really, really well for me. We had others that are like, it was actually the self-paced exercises that really drove it home. So once again, having those different learning methods for different learning styles really helped here. And the last thing I wanted to call out, although we don't have an example, is we did integrated description. So instead of having a separate audio description video, we actually made sure that as part of the script, we actually talked to what was on the screen. So we didn't need two versions. We just had that single version that actually, talked to any visuals that there were.
And look, I think that's crucial too, Sarah, because in the end, what you've done is adopted inclusive design in the development of that video. And in that process, making that description rich and integrated meant you actually saved time and resources in having to create an additional video too. And I think that's the message people can take away from this. There are a whole range, not only has this worked for Service New South Wales? Yes. But are there takeaways in how you've designed the content? Most certainly as well.
And another piece of feedback we got, I liked watching the videos. Self-paced is great as we need the flexibility to fit this around other things. So let's have a little bit of a look at the live practical sessions. I've got two examples here. The first one was from an activity for product designers, and this accompanied the module on different input methods. And in particular here, we were focusing on keyboard. So when we did the activities, we always tried to choose Service New South Wales examples. So here we've actually got the My Service New South Wales account dashboard, which is the page you basically get when you log into the My Service New South Wales account. And we were looking at keyboard accessibility here. So we've got some little annotations that I asked the designers to use, where we actually went through and, I asked the designers to annotate this in whatever order you think the keyboard that basically the tab order should be. What this example and lots of others really drove home is two things. First of all, some of these pages may not have been designed with accessibility in mind, or there's still little things that we could improve. So this was a case of what do we do with things that are as is, but then it led to discussions like, if we were to design this or rebuild this again, what would we consider? And so it also showed not just, the concept of keyboard accessibility and how we believe that's part of interaction design. And so designers should actually look at that and annotate it for their engineers as well. But it got people thinking, here is the reason why I should be thinking about this at this time, because if I thought about this, I might do this little design bit differently based on the examples that we were using.
In there, again, it gave people permission to think differently. And yes, we've been a really busy organisation, but also sometimes, again, it's that assumption word again. You're making assumptions that there were well-considered decisions about how that original design was done, and we sometimes build upon those. And you go, no, guys, let's stop, reflect, and redesign.
Yeah. Here's another activity. This one was actually part of the research, the user research one. And in here, we actually used the profiles from gov.uk. So this profile was Ashley, and there's a bit of information about Ashley, the different technologies she uses, the frustrations, that kind of thing. But then we actually did an activity with the designers or product designers once again to ask questions like, are there any research methods that may be more or less suitable for Ashley based on their profile? We know the best thing is always to ask a person, but it really got people thinking. This was actually a group activity where we had 7 different profiles. So I popped people into breakout rooms. They got to go through and think about the research methods that might be suitable for Ashley, whether remote was suitable or whether in person was suitable. And then we came back together and did a show and tell and actually discussed that. And once again, this was the richness, I think, of the live sessions, and that really came out in the feedback. Here's another quote from someone through our feedback form. The live sessions are really good opportunities for us to learn and recap on each module and also ask work-related questions.
We saw that all the time, though, didn't we, Sarah? And particularly coming into our accessibility genius bar of awesomeness, which was our fun name, folks, for our Q&A and a chance for teams to come along. What we saw in that previous slide and what we'll see in here is it was the learnings and the language from the courses coming into everyday conversation, wasn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, that's right. When people rock up, for instance, to the Genius Bar and say, oh, I learned this in training, or that kind of thing. And you just, you feel proud, don't you?
That's right. That's right. But look, the Genius Bars were our weekly sessions, weren't they, where people got a chance to come and share some of their work and also have a safe space. And I'll keep using that language. It was a safe space for them to share their work and receive some additional advice, but also for us to probe and ask questions to get them thinking further. And yeah, they've been really, really well received, haven't they?
They really have. And to me, actually, this is the continued mentoring that
It is.
sort of continues after you do the training. So the training is there, it gives you all those fundamentals, you learn a lot, but then you start putting it into practice. And that's where that next level of learning comes from. And in essence, actually, the way we've structured this of sort of the videos, the self-paced exercises, the live sessions, and then the Genius Bar, all of this actually builds people's learning and understanding over time.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's seeing, yes, I could get some training off the shelf. We didn't. Why? Because it's this whole integrated approach. And it's the value of that way the courses have been designed, how it's fitted into our other work, how it's fitted into here. And because it's part of that ongoing cultural change, you just can't go dump.
Yeah.
There's been some really rich thinking on that.
Yeah. So another part of this was some pre and post checks. So we actually did some pre and post checks both before people actually started the videos and then after they had finished the videos. So the pre-checks were they had two parts to them. First was a bit of a knowledge check. The questions were quite general and we weren't actually trying to test people's knowledge. It was more just to get them thinking about, some of the content and topics that were coming up in the module. And then the post check sort of had more detailed questions that were related to the content that was delivered in the module. And it just allowed us to see if people, were sort of improving their knowledge between that pre and post check. The other thing, though, we did was a self-assessment. So, if a module had maybe 4 or 5 different subtopics in it, we asked people to rate their confidence before they started the videos and then after they finished the videos. Once again, to gauge as they sort of did some of these learnings, was that leading to them being more confident about their knowledge in these different topics? So on to our feedback. What did people say? We've kind of been reading out some quotes, but we did the quantitative measure as well. So what we found was we asked a range of questions about like the content and the course delivery and that kind of thing. On average, what we found is people mainly reported content was somewhat challenging. So in a scale of 1 to 5, this was actually around a 3. And that's really where we wanted people to be sitting. We don't want it to be so challenging because that can turn people off, but we don't want it to be so easy that they kind of walk away and go, well, that was a bit of a waste of time. So that average was about where we wanted. There was definitely the odd outlier. You could see some people who I think would have had more experience in accessibility did find it, pretty easy. But hopefully all those other parts of the program, like the live sessions, like the Genius Bar, actually, make sure that those that are a little bit more progressed can still continue their learning just in a different way.
Yeah, and look, just on that, we also had some people who enrolled in courses that were out of their field. So we had designers jumping into an engineering course.
Yes, we did. Yeah, absolutely. We also asked how engaging the content was, and people reported that was very or extremely engaging. So that's a 4 to 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. So, to me, that's exactly where we want to be sitting, is up that top end. And also when we asked if the content was relevant to their roles, once again, on average, we were getting that very or extremely. So once again, that 4 to 5. So really the feedback was showing that the way we were presenting that content, how engaging, how challenging, how relevant it was, we kind of were pretty much on the mark on that one.
Yeah. And that's it. I think on all of those things, you're seeing that balance between strong engagement and relevance, but also that it had that right amount of challenge, because as you said, that's the key, getting the balance between all of those areas right.
And also courses were rated good or excellent. So once again, 4 to 5 on that scale. So people were enjoying them. They were very happy with them, which is exactly what we wanted. We did want to, though, understand what blockers there were to people actually completing the course.
I think we've alluded to this. It was partly in discovery, and it's been throughout the organisation. Because of the nature of the work that we do here within our digital services team, and that there are significant competing demands on time and competing priorities, you can go, oh yeah, I'm booking in for then. And then life goes to hell in a handbasket because COVID hits or a flood or a whatever hits. It means that as an organisation, we've got to look at this because we've got to look at a way to find, to give them that opportunity because of the benefits that it's given.
And look, the live sessions do mean that, you know, it makes it a little bit harder to deliver. But the value of the live sessions, I don't think can be understated, which is why we still made that choice to go with this model as opposed to a completely async self-paced model. There is only so much I think you can do in, you know, using that sort of one modality.
That's spot on, Sarah, because the one modality, look, if we wanted to, we could have bought some off-the-shelf stuff. We didn't. And it's because it's that strength of that modality, but and understanding that, yes, you need to be able to consume that content and reflect upon it, but then you need to take it from short-term to longer-term memory. You need to have those conversations. You need to involve yourself in practical discussions and activities. And that's the thing. It's understanding that learning science to go with also our distributed environment. So yeah, they were absolutely crucial.
And I'm going to actually give a shout out to Tess here because they're the ones that have basically guided us in the learning science. Yeah. Neither of us are experts in this area. No. They are. And yeah, honestly, a lot of this was driven by their knowledge and understanding of that learning process.
Yeah, and look, and that's the great depth of who you've got in your team there, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really proud.
Yeah.
So, Greg, next steps for Service New South Wales.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a journey that never ends, is it? WCAG 2.2 is knocking at the door, and 3 won't be that far away. But it's knowing that it is that ongoing conversation. So what are we looking at here? There's a whole range of things. One, we're looking at about how we adopt the W3C accessibility maturity model, because we realise it's more than just how we develop the apps. It comes down to our HR and our procurement and our executive messages and everything in those processes there. What else? We now have a deeper understanding within the organisation about customer recruitment. So what are we looking at? What's a consistent approach? And that's that key word, consistency. What's the consistent approach that we can scale up across all of our product teams? And so now in our design practice, everybody goes, oh yeah, good customer design and research, it's got to be inclusive by default. That's now a given. So now that that's a given, it's going, well, okay, how do we scale that up? And so, yeah, we're actually working with you, Sarah, on another project in that space, which is really exciting. The other thing is the ongoing search for the balance of tools, because it's going, what's the right tools along the process for all of those different roles, and knowing that each tool will have its strengths and limitations. So that's an ongoing conversation, and also some more work on that evaluation process. So that's part of our conversation. There's more things happening, but we recognise that it is a journey. Because we then start to get into really interesting things about what does this look like in providing services over the Internet of Things and further down the track. So in the end, for us, it is about that world-class experience for everyone. But that world-class experience, as we've said, is inclusive by design and accessible by default. And an integral component of that, has been the training that we've undertaken with Sarah and the team. And look, may the journey continue for a long, long time, my friend.
Yes, to accessibility and beyond. And with that, we'll leave you there. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and hope to see you soon.
Take care, everyone.
AliCamp 2022.